The weight of memory. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the massive observation window of the Galactic Federation's Grand Assembly, her weathered hands clasped behind her back. The swirling purple nebula beyond served as a backdrop to the gathered representatives of over 300 species. Today marked humanity's 100th year in the Federation, and she had been chosen to explain why Earth, against all odds and expectations, had become the galaxy's most trusted mediator of peace. Distinguished representatives, she began, her voice carrying across the chamber. A century ago, when humanity first stepped onto this floor, many of you feared us. Your archaeological surveys of Earth had revealed our violent history. You had seen the ruins of our cities, the remnants of our nuclear tests, the scars we had left on our world. You expected us to be the warriors, the conquerors, the ones who would bring chaos to your carefully balanced civilization. A ripple of agreement passed through the assembly. The Arxer delegation's crystalline forms sparkled as they shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own initial protests against human admission. But you didn't understand something fundamental about us, Sarah continued, activating the holographic display. The image of Earth, scarred and healing, appeared before them. You saw our capacity for violence, but missed our capacity for learning from our mistakes. You see, every human child learns about the Great Wars, not through glory, but through grief. The hologram shifted to show a classroom in New Delhi. A young girl stood frozen in horror as she watched historical footage of the nuclear devastation of Hiroshima. Another image, a boy in Lagos tracing his fingers over the names of fallen soldiers at a war memorial. A third, teenagers in Buenos Aires participating in a virtual reality simulation of trench warfare, many of them removing their headsets with tears streaming down their faces. We don't teach war as triumph, Sarah's voice cracked slightly. We teach it as tragedy. Every human carries the weight of our history, not as a badge of honor, but as a solemn warning. When we reached the stars, we didn't come looking for new battlefields. We came carrying generations of hard-earned wisdom about the true cost of conflict. She gestured to the Centaurian delegation, their tentacles gently undulating. When the Centaurian Proximan crisis erupted 20 years ago, you expected us to choose sides, to seek advantage in your conflict. Instead, we shared our archives. We showed both your peoples our own Cuban Missile Crisis, how we had stood at the brink of annihilation and chosen to step back. We showed you that pride and fear could be overcome. The hologram displayed the famous images of the Centaurian Proximan Peace Accord, signed on the very spot where the Berlin Wall had once stood. A powerful symbol of humanity's journey from division to unity. But perhaps the most powerful lesson we brought to the stars was this. Sarah touched a control, and the final hologram appeared. Earth's first contact with the Arxer, a moment that had tested everything humanity had learned. The Arxer had approached Earth with weapons charged, expecting the violent species they had read about in their historical scans. They had encountered instead a fleet that refused to raise shields, commanded by Admiral Helena Martinez, whose words would become legend. We see your weapons, friends, and we understand your fear. We've pointed such weapons at ourselves often enough to know what they mean. But we're going to keep our shields down, because someone has to take the first step toward trust. We've learned, God, how we've learned, that peace isn't the absence of strength. It's the wisdom to know when not to use it. The chamber was silent now, every being present transfixed by the image of that first human ship, vulnerable and yet unflinching in its commitment to peace. Sarah's voice softened. That moment changed everything. Not because we were weak, but because we had learned to be strong in a different way. The Arxer expected us to be the warriors you all feared. Instead, they found something far more powerful. A species that had mastered its own worst impulses. She turned back to the window, watching the nebula's cosmic dance. This is only the beginning of our story, because the greatest test of humanity's commitment to peace was yet to come, and it would require everything we had learned and more to face it. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Even those who had lived through these events leaned forward, eager to hear what came next. Because they all knew that the real challenge had begun when the swarm had appeared at the edge of known space and humanity's philosophy of peace had faced its greatest test. The impossible choice. Ambassador Chen's holographic display shifted, showing the dark edge of the Orion Arm where humanity first encountered the swarm. The assembled Federation representatives leaned forward, many of them having lived through these events, but never having heard the full story from the human perspective. The swarm arrived, Sarah continued, like a living shadow across the stars. Their first message was simple: submit or be cleansed. We had faced threats before, but nothing like this. Their biomechanical ships numbered in the millions, each one a piece of a vast, interconnected consciousness that had consumed 12 galaxies before reaching ours. The hologram showed the first swarm contact vessel, a massive, organic structure that seemed to pulse with internal light, its surface writhing with what appeared to be technological infections growing across living tissue. The Federation Council was divided. The Arxur wanted to strike first with everything we had. The Centaurians advocated for immediate surrender, hoping to buy time. But humanity, we saw something everyone else missed. She pulled up the first detailed scans of the swarm vessel. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, our leading xenobiologist, noticed something in their biology. The swarm wasn't just a conquering force, they were running from something. Their cellular structure showed signs of desperate adaptation of a species trying to outpace extinction itself. The chamber stirred as Sarah revealed the next image. A human diplomatic vessel dwarfed by the massive swarm ship, approaching without weapons or shields. At its helm was Dr. Tanaka herself, along with a team of Earth's finest scientists and diplomats. Some called it suicide, others called it naive. We called it understanding. You see, humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our military might. It's our ability to recognize pain in others, even when it's wrapped in aggression. The recording played, Doctor. Tanaka's voice clear and steady. We understand what it means to face extinction. To feel that the only way forward is through strength and domination. But we've learned there's another way. Let us help you find it. Sarah's voice softened. The swarm's response was unexpected. For the first time in their million-year history of conquest, they hesitated. Because no species had ever approached them with an offer of help rather than surrender or resistance. The hologram showed the historical moment when Dr. Tanaka and her team were allowed aboard the swarm vessel. What they discovered changed the course of galactic history. The swarm was fighting a war against entropy itself. Their biological-technological fusion was a desperate attempt to preserve their consciousness as their original sun began to die. Each conquest was an attempt to gather resources and knowledge to prevent their extinction. They had become the very thing they feared, a force of destruction, because they thought it was the only way to survive. The display shifted to show the massive engineering project that followed. Humans and the swarm working together to stabilize the quantum structure of their dying star, using technology that combined the best of biological and mechanical engineering. We offered them something no one had before. Not submission, not resistance, but collaboration. The very things that made us seem weak to others, our emphasis on cooperation, our drive to understand rather than dominate, became our greatest strength. Sarah walked through the hologram, her figure passing through the images of human and swarm scientists working side by side. But this success came at a critical moment, because something far worse was approaching from the galactic core. Something that would test not just humanity's commitment to peace, but the very foundations of our philosophy. She paused, looking at the assembled representatives. The swarm had been running from something, and now we knew what it was. At the heart of our galaxy, an ancient consciousness was stirring. One that saw peace not as strength, but as a weakness to be exploited. The hologram showed a massive dark shape, moving against the galactic core, barely visible, but undeniably present. The entity, as we came to call it, had been manipulating species against each other for millions of years, feeding off the energy of their conflicts. And now, with humanity's philosophy of peace spreading throughout the galaxy, it saw its food source threatened. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the usually restless Arxur perfectly still. They all knew what came next, the moment when humanity's commitment to peace faced its greatest test. Because the entity didn't just threaten war, it threatened to unravel the very fabric of civilization itself. And that, Sarah said softly, is when we discovered that sometimes the greatest act of peace is being willing to stand.
And assembly chamber darkened as Ambassador Sarah Chen manipulated the holographic controls with practiced ease. The vast display now showed the galactic core, a seemingly empty void that somehow felt more menacing than any visible threat could have been. To truly understand what we faced, Sarah began, her voice carrying a weight that made even the normally restless Arxer grow still. You must first understand how the entity manifested. It didn't arrive with fleets or weapons. It came in whispers. The hologram shifted to show the Federation colony of New Haven, a usually peaceful world where multiple species had coexisted for centuries. The recording's timestamp showed it was taken exactly 1 solar year ago. The first signs were subtle, Sarah continued, as the hologram showed civilians of various species going about their daily lives. A Centaurian merchant suddenly becoming suspicious of their Arxur customers. An Arxur crystal smith finding themselves unable to sleep, plagued by inexplicable fears. A human teacher waking up in cold sweats, haunted by wars they'd never fought. The display zoomed in on a marketplace where a Centaurian merchant was arguing with an Arxur customer, their tentacles writhing in uncharacteristic aggression. "Watch closely," Sarah instructed, freezing the frame. "Do you see it?" She highlighted a strange distortion in the air, almost like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but moving against gravity. The entity's influence was literally visible if you knew where to look. Dr. Maria Santos, our leading quantum psychiatrist, was the first to make the connection. The hologram shifted to show Dr. Santos in her laboratory, surrounded by complex equipment and neural scanning devices. Her dark eyes were intense as she addressed an emergency session of the Federation Council. "What we're seeing isn't just mass hysteria," Dr. Santos's recorded voice echoed through the chamber. "It's a targeted psychological attack operating on a quantum level. The entity isn't just broadcasting thoughts, it's weaponizing trauma itself." Sarah paused the recording. This was the moment we realized we weren't just facing a physical threat. The entity had found a way to turn our own histories against us. For the Arxer, it dredged up memories of their great crystalline shattering. For the Centaurians, it replayed the horrors of their binary star crisis. And for humans, she closed her eyes briefly. For humans, it showed us every war we'd ever fought, every atrocity we'd ever committed, every moment of darkness in our history. But this is where the entity made its first crucial mistake. The hologram now displayed the Human Resilience Center in Geneva, where Dr. Santos had established the first defense against the entity's attacks. The massive facility was filled with representatives from every Federation species, all connected to neural monitoring equipment. "You see," Sarah continued, "humans had spent centuries developing ways to deal with historical trauma. Every child on Earth learns not just about our wars, but about how we healed from them. We had centuries of experience in processing collective pain, in facing our darkness without being consumed by it." The display showed Dr. Santos working with a young Arxur crystalline formation, teaching them human meditation techniques adapted for their unique consciousness. We didn't just resist the entity's influence, we began teaching others how to resist it too. The same techniques we had developed to help war veterans heal, to help children process historical trauma, to help nations reconcile. These became our weapons in a war that couldn't be won with conventional forces. but the entity was far from defeated. The hologram showed its next phase of attack, the psychic assault intensifying until it began manifesting physical effects. On a dozen worlds, mysterious structures began growing from the ground, black crystalline formations that seemed to pulse with malevolent purpose. The entity was learning, adapting, Sarah explained. When it couldn't break our minds, it tried to break our resolve through sheer terror. These structures were psychic amplifiers, designed to broadcast fear and anger on a planetary scale. Traditional military leaders wanted to bomb them into oblivion, but Dr. Santos had a different idea. The display showed teams of humans, Arcsur, and Centaurians approaching these structures not with weapons, but with modified versions of Earth's old EEG machines. "We didn't try to destroy the amplifiers," Sarah said. "We tried to understand them. And what we found changed everything we thought we knew about the entity." Dr. Santos's voice played again, this time from a field recording. "These aren't weapons. They're attempts at communication. The entity doesn't know how to reach out without causing pain, because pain is all it has ever known. It's not just attacking us, it's screaming for help in the only way it knows how." Thurkey.
Ambassador Chen's hands moved across the holographic controls with deliberate precision, and the chamber filled with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Project Harmony," she said, letting the words hang in the air. On paper, it was the most ambitious engineering project in human history. In reality, it was nothing less than an attempt to change the fundamental way sentient beings interacted with each other across the galaxy. The hologram displayed the project's massive scale. Millions of satellites positioned at precise intervals throughout Federation space, each one a marvel of cross-species engineering. The devices themselves were beautiful, incorporating elements from every member species. Arcsur crystals pulsing with stored energy, Centaurian bioorganic processors, human quantum computers, and even modified versions of the swarm's neural networks. "The technical challenges were staggering," Sarah continued as the display zoomed in on a single satellite's intricate construction. "But the real difficulty wasn't technological, it was cultural. We weren't just building a network, we were asking every species in the Federation to share their deepest thoughts, their most profound emotions, their very consciousness." The hologram shifted to show Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the project's lead psychologist, addressing a crowd of skeptical Federation representatives. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her dark eyes intense with conviction. "I know what you're thinking," Dr. Rodriguez's recorded voice echoed through the chamber. "That humans are naive, that we're asking too much, that this level of vulnerability is too dangerous. But consider this, we're already vulnerable. The entity has proved that. The question isn't whether we can afford to open ourselves to each other. It's whether we can afford not to." Sarah paused the recording. The debate raged for weeks. The Arcsur feared losing their precious mental privacy. The Centaurians worried about cultural contamination. Even the Swarm, despite their linked consciousness, hesitated at the idea of connecting with other species on such a fundamental level. The display showed the turning point, a small experiment conducted on the Federation station Unity. 20 volunteers, 2 from each of the 10 most populous Federation species, agreed to connect through a prototype of the Harmony network. "What happened next changed everything," Sarah said softly, as the hologram showed the volunteers' first connection. They didn't just share thoughts or memories, they shared understanding. An Arcsur experienced a Centaurian sunset through alien eyes. A human felt the crystalline clarity of Arcsur consciousness. A member of the Swarm knew for the first time what it meant to be truly individual. The display shifted to show the aftermath. The volunteers embracing each other, many of them weeping or expressing emotion in their species' unique ways. None of them were the same after that, Sarah explained. They had experienced something unprecedented in galactic history. True, complete empathy across species boundaries. The the hologram now showed the construction of the first full-scale Harmony nodes. Thousands of workers from different species labored side by side, their efforts coordinated with unprecedented precision thanks to the prototype network they all shared. But the entity wasn't idle during this time, Sarah continued, her voice growing grave. The display showed dark tendrils of energy reaching out from the galactic core, probing, testing. It sensed what we were building. It understood that Project Harmony threatened its very existence. And it launched its counterattack with devastating precision. The hologram displayed the attack on Unity Station. The entity's influence manifested as a cascading failure in the prototype network, threatening to trap the connected minds in a loop of their worst memories and fears. This was the moment when Project Harmony almost failed, Sarah admitted. 20 brave volunteers faced psychological torment beyond anything we had prepared for. But then something remarkable happened, something that proved humans weren't wrong to believe in the power of connection. The display showed Dr. Rodriguez rushing to the sealed chamber where the volunteers were connected, ignoring the warnings of her staff. What she did next was either the bravest or most foolish thing in the project's history, Sarah said. She connected herself to the network at its darkest moment. The hologram captured the crucial moment. Doctor. Rodriguez, her face contorted in shared pain, reaching out to touch the connection interface. She didn't try to fight the entity's influence, Sarah explained. Instead, she did something unprecedented. She opened herself completely to it, allowing herself to feel everything: the pain, the fear, the darkness. But also hope, love, and the unshakable belief in connection. The display showed the cascade of events that followed. The other volunteers, inspired by Rodriguez's example, stopped trying to resist the entity's attack. Instead, they opened themselves fully to each other and to the darkness itself. The entity's influence, meant to isolate and terrify, instead became a conduit for the deepest kind of understanding. When the dust settled, Sarah continued, the volunteers were changed, but not broken. They had faced the worst of what the entity could do, and they had discovered something profound. True connection, true understanding couldn't be weaponized. It could only be shared. The hologram showed the aftermath. The volunteers, exhausted but triumphant, sharing their experience with the Federation Council. Their testimony was powerful, not just for what they said, but for how they said it. Each one unconsciously adopting the gestures and expressions of the other species they had connected with. This was the real revolution, Sarah said, her voice filled with quiet pride. Not the technology, not the satellites, not even the network itself. The revolution was in showing the galaxy that true strength lies not in walls, but in bridges. Not in resistance, but in acceptance. Not in fear, but in understanding. The display showed the rapid acceleration of Project Harmony's implementation following the Unity Station incident. Billions of beings across the Federation, volunteering to be connected, each connection strengthening the whole, each shared experience making the network more resilient. But even this was just preparation, Sarah concluded, her eyes reflecting the holographic light. Because the entity was about to launch its final desperate assault. And the true test of Project Harmony, and everything humanity believed about the power of peace, was about to begin. The chamber was hushed, every being present knowing that what came next would either validate or destroy everything they had built together. Because the entity's final attack would target not just their bodies or their minds, but the very thing that made them who they were, their hope for a better way.
The Grand Assembly Chamber dimmed to near darkness, and Ambassador Chen's holographic display showed only the swirling darkness at the galaxy's heart, the entity, now fully awakened and aware of Project Harmony's threat to its existence. What happened next? Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the chamber, would reshape not just our understanding of peace, but our understanding of consciousness itself. The hologram expanded to show the entity's final assault. Unlike its previous attacks, this wasn't subtle. Massive tendrils of dark energy reached across space, targeting not just the Harmony satellites, but the minds connected to them. The entity struck with the accumulated knowledge of billions of years, Sarah continued. It had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies, had fed on the conflicts of countless civilizations. It saw Project Harmony as we might see a candle in a hurricane, something fragile, easily extinguished. The display showed the first wave of the attack. Harmony satellites began failing, their carefully engineered components twisted by the entity's power. On thousands of worlds, connected beings fell to their knees as ancient memories of conflict and destruction flooded their minds. But this time, something was different, Sarah said, manipulating the controls to zoom in on a single Harmony node. The entity had never encountered a network like this, not just a technological construct, but a living tapestry of shared consciousness. When it struck one part, the whole responded. The hologram showed Dr. Rodriguez and her team at the primary Harmony Control Center on Earth. Emergency alerts flashed across their screens as the entity's attack intensified. "Elena," one of her assistants called out, "the network is failing. We need to shut it down." The recording captured Dr. Rodriguez's response, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "No, we don't need less connection right now. We need more. Open all channels, full bandwidth. Let everyone feel everything." "But the pain," another assistant protested, "is nothing compared to the pain of isolation," Rodriguez finished. "Trust in connection, trust in understanding. That's what we've learned. That's what we've built." The hologram showed her orders being carried out. Instead of shutting down in the face of the entity's attack, the Harmony network opened fully. Every connected being in the Federation suddenly had access to the complete spectrum of shared experience. What happened next was... Sarah paused, searching for words. How do you describe a moment when trillions of minds touch? When every joy, every sorrow, every hope and fear and dream becomes part of a single, vast tapestry of consciousness. The display showed the wave of connection spreading across Federation space. The entity's dark tendrils, meant to inspire fear and isolation, instead became conduits for something it had never encountered: absolute, unconditional understanding. Arxur shared their crystal songs of creation. Centaurians opened their ancestral memory wells. Humans offered their centuries of learning to overcome conflict. The swarm contributed their understanding of unity through diversity. Every species, every being, gave what they had and received what others offered. The hologram captured the moment when this wave of shared consciousness reached the entity itself. Its dark tendrils froze, then began to pulse with new colors. Not just the purple of fear or the red of rage, but every shade imaginable. For the first time in its ancient existence, Sarah continued, the entity experienced something beyond conflict and consumption. It felt the joy of a Centaurian child's first flight, the pride of an Arxur completing their first crystal form, the wonder of a human seeing Earth from space, the unity of the swarm's shared purpose. The display showed the entity's form changing. The darkness shot through with threads of light. Its tendrils, once weapons, began to wave like curious fingers, exploring rather than attacking. "But the true miracle wasn't that we stopped the entity's attack," Sarah said. "It was what happened next. The entity began to share its own experiences. Memories of the universe before our own, knowledge of physics beyond our understanding, perspectives that spanned billions of years." The hologram showed the transformation of the Harmony network as it incorporated the entity's vast knowledge. The satellites evolved, becoming more organic, more alive, guided by understanding accumulated over eons. Today, Sarah gestured to the chamber's actual windows, where the entity's transformed form could be seen pulsing gently at the galaxy's heart. What we once feared as our greatest enemy has become our greatest teacher. The entity serves as the living heart of our Federation's communication network, its ancient knowledge tempered by newfound wisdom. The display showed scenes from across Federation space, children of different species learning together, sharing thoughts and feelings through the evolved Harmony network. Scientists from 100 worlds, collaborating on projects that would have been impossible without shared consciousness. Diplomatic meetings where misunderstandings dissolved in the face of true empathy. This is why humans avoid war, Sarah said, her voice strong with conviction. Not because we are weak, but because we have learned that there are better ways to be strong. We carry the scars of our history not as a burden, but as a reminder that every species, every being, every consciousness in this vast universe has the capacity to change. The hologram faded to show the chamber itself, filled with representatives of hundreds of species, all connected through the transformed harmony network, all feeling each other's reactions to the story. Our story isn't over, Sarah concluded. There will be new challenges, new conflicts, new misunderstandings. But we face them together, not as separate species struggling for dominance, but as a community bound by something stronger than fear, the shared commitment to finding a better way. She touched her chest, where her own harmony interface pulsed softly. Feel it now, all of you. Feel how far we've come. Feel the truth that humanity discovered so long ago, that true peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding. That true strength isn't in what we can destroy, but in what we can create together. The chamber erupted in a way it never had before, not with the formal applause of diplomatic courtesy, but with a wave of shared emotion that rippled through the harmony network, each species contributing its own unique form of appreciation and understanding. Because they all knew that this story, incredible as it seemed, was not just humanity's story anymore. It was the story of what becomes possible when we choose to understand rather than fear, to connect rather than withdraw, to reach out rather than strike out. It was the story of peace, not as an ideal, but as a practice, not as a destination, but as a journey they would all take together.